Thank you, Ms. Persis.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen of the jury. Good afternoon, Ms. Lupa. Now, we met at your deposition, but again, my name is Bethany Schneider, and I represent R.J. Reynolds. And I'm going to be asking you a few questions today about some of the things that you talked about with Mr. Gary, okay?
Yes.
And we do have your deposition here in case you need to refer to it, okay?
Okay.
I want to start by asking some follow-up questions to some of the things that you talked about with Mr. Gary. One of the things that you said on direct, ma'am, was that your father never had a cough. Is that right?
Right.
And so I just want to make sure we're clear that is it your testimony that your father never in his entire life had a cough?
No.
Okay.
No. I didn't mean if he got a cold, he coughed, but he didn't have a cough that he coughed all the time. If he had a cold, he would cough.
All right.
Yeah.
So there were some times throughout his life where you did notice your father coughing. Is that right?
Yes, if he had a cold, yes.
All right. You also showed a picture, I think, of you and your sisters at a parade with some candy cigarettes. Remember that?
Yes.
And you referred to the fact that the packs had the Viceroy label on them. Is that right?
Yes.
Just to be clear, ma'am, your father never smoked Viceroy cigarettes, did he?
No, he didn't.
And you never smoked Viceroy cigarettes, correct?
No, I didn't.
You told the jury that your father did not attend 12th grade, right?
Right.
And the jury has been shown some documents regarding prep schools and high schools. But your father never attended any prep schools, right?
No.
And your father never attended any high schools, did he?
No.
You also told the jury that there were commercials on TV all the time. Did those continue into the 1970s and 80s?
I wouldn't remember.
Okay. So if there had been a ban on cigarette commercials on TV starting in 1971, that would be consistent with your memory that cigarette commercials went off of TV.
I'm sorry, say that again?
Oh, sure. If there was a ban on cigarette commercials on television starting in 1971, that would be consistent with your memory that at some point cigarette commercials went off of TV, right?
Well, I just remember what I saw.
Okay.
On TV.
All right. And so what you remember was cigarette commercials maybe in the 1960s time period. Is that right?
Yeah, that would have been when I could see them if they went off at a certain, year.
Okay. Now, ma'am, in your deposition, you were asked several times about Dr. Cowan. And at no time did you say that you had ever been treated by Dr. Cowan.
Okay, no speaking objections. I'm going to overrule the objection because I don't think she's impeaching. You may proceed.
And at no time in your deposition did you say that you, in fact, had been treated by Dr. Cowan, correct?
Correct.
And at no time in your deposition when you were asked about Dr. Cowan several times did you say that you had gone to him and gotten a letter from him, correct?
I wasn't asked that, but I forgot that I went to him, but I did when I moved here in 99. It was a few years later, and then I did go to Dr. Cowan, but I hadn't remembered that.
How long did you treat with Dr. Cowan?
It was a few years.
Okay.
I can't remember the exact time.
Now, was this the first appointment you went to Dr. Cowan?
She want to go to the deposition and I'm going back to the objection.
She didn't reference that. She didn't reference that. She just asked. No, that's not what she's asking about because this witness didn't even mention this in the deposition. I think.
Yeah, but she wouldn't ask.
Okay, but there's no speaking objections, Mr. Gary. So I'm going to overrule. Let's proceed, please.
All right, ma'am. Going back to my question. Did you receive this letter from Dr. Cowan on the first appointment you went to with him?
No.
But do you remember how long you'd been treating with him when you did receive
No,
this?
I can't remember.
Do you remember the date of the letter that you received?
The date of the letter?
Well, when you received it?
I remember because I saw it, 2008.
Okay. Now, what you said in your deposition about Dr. Cowan was that you remembered the name, but that you...
Okay. No speaking objections, just don't reference deposition, what you testified earlier. That's fine.
Okay. Sure, I'll rephrase. What you've testified previously, ma'am, when you were asked about who Dr. Cowan was, you said that you remembered the name, but that you couldn't tell us if he was his main doctor because you weren't there when Dr. Cowan treated your father, correct?
That's correct.
Another time when you were asked about Dr. Cowan, in a previous testimony, you also said what you knew about Dr. Cowan was that he treated your father.
Okay, counsel sidebar, no more speaking objections.
Thank you, Your Honor. So getting back to talking about Dr. Cowan and what you knew about Dr. Cowan is that in your previous testimony, when you were asked about what you knew about Dr. Cowan, what you said was that he treated your father, but that you didn't discuss Dr. Cowan with your mother, correct?
Right.
And your mother never complained to you about Dr. Cowan's care, right?
Right.
And your father never complained to you about Dr. Cowan's care, right?
Right.
Now, Ms. Lupo, you told us that you lived in Connecticut when your father passed away in 1993, correct?
Yes.
You moved to Connecticut around 1987, right?
No. I moved to Connecticut. This is where I get confused with dates. I moved to Florida in 79. And yeah, probably around that time. Somewhere around there.
Okay. Okay. So somewhere around 1987 until 1999, you lived in Connecticut, correct?
Yes, except for one brief time I was here for a year, like in maybe 95 or so, that I forgot about.
Okay, that's okay.
Yeah.
But you didn't move back to Florida prior to your father's passing, correct?
No, I just came down to see them when I could.
And the times you came down to see him after your father was diagnosed with lung cancer was in December of 1990, correct?
Yes,
And then you didn't come down to Florida again until right before your father passed away in 1993. Is that right?
that's right.
So between December of 1990 and I guess the summer of 1993, you did not see your father in Florida, correct?
Correct.
And so you did not have any firsthand knowledge of his state of health during that period of time, correct?
Correct.
And you would not have any firsthand knowledge of his smoking between December of 1990 and right before he passed away in 1993, correct?
Well, I went down there in 1990.
Yes,
And I
yes,
saw him smoke.
right.
That's the last, the time that I saw him smoking between 90 and 93.
Yes, and so what I'm asking you is after you came back from Florida in December of 1990 until you saw him again right before his passing in 1993, you don't have any firsthand knowledge of his smoking, correct?
No.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Now, have you reviewed any of the depositions in this case other than your own?
No.
Did you know that Dr. Cowan in his deposition testified under oath that he did sign the death certificate?
Just say objection, and I'll sustain.
Objection.
Sustain.
I think you said several times during your direct examination that you read your father's medical records, including the letter from Dr. Cowan. Is that right?
I saw them, yes.
Okay. But as of your deposition in May of this year, you had never looked at any of your father's medical records. Is that correct?
I didn't, well, we did, because right at the what is that called, deposition,
Mm-hmm.
I did see his medical records, yes.
Prior to his deposition in May of this year, you had never looked at any of his medical records, correct?
No, not that I remember, no.
So at your deposition in May of this year was the first time you looked at any of your father's medical records, right?
Well, the ones that were from the hospital and everything, yes.
Well, there were no other medical records that you looked at prior to your deposition, right?
No,
Is that right?
right.
Ma'am, I think you told the jury that your father would always have to leave Mass to smoke. Is that right?
Yes,
Isn't it true, ma'am, that you only saw him leave Mass one time to smoke?
no, I saw more than that.
All right. Well, let's take a look at your deposition, okay?
Yes.
Your Honor, may I approach?
Yes, of course.
I'll go ahead and just give both volumes.
Sure, that's
so that we can save some
No
time.
problem, thank you.
Here you go, ma'am. Now I'd ask you to turn to the second volume. Oh, I'm sorry, the first volume. Before I do that, you remember giving a deposition in this case, correct? I need to lay the
She has
foundation.
to lay the foundation before she can teach us. Just give defense counsel, plaintiff's counsel paper.
Sure, it's 203, 5 through 13. So, Your Honor, ma'am, you remember giving a deposition in this case, correct?
Yes,
And you gave it on 2 separate occasions, right?
yes,
The first was in May of this year,
yes,
and the second was in July of this year.
yes.
And I had the pleasure of meeting you on that second time in July of this year, right? And we went over here to an office building, right, in downtown West Palm,
Yes,
and there was a court reporter there taking down what we said,
yes,
and you were under oath there, right?
yes,
Just like you're under today.
yes,
And you were asked whether you were taking any kind of medications or had any kind of medical conditions that would affect your ability to testify, right?
yes,
And you said no.
right.
Sure. All right, Ms. Lupo. So you were under oath at your deposition, correct?
Yes,
The same oath you're under today,
yes,
right? So I'll ask you to go to 203, 5 through 13. You were asked the following questions and gave,
that's in the first one you said?
yes, yeah.
Yeah, objection was sustained. Okay, hold on. Objection was sustained. So Ms. Schneider's going to re-ask the question before we get to the deposition. That's
All right,
fine.
ma'am. Now, when you remember your father going to Mass and leaving Mass to go outside to smoke, there's only one time you remember that happening, correct?
No,
Okay.
no,
If you look at 203, line 5 through 13, you were asked the following questions and gave the following answers.
Okay,
So-
sustained. Why don't you re-ask the exact same question?
I think I did, Your Honor.
Did you see him do that yourself? Page 8, line 8, let's ask that question.
Okay.
Did you tell me?
No, don't read it yet.
Oh,
Okay, go ahead, Ms. Schneider.
So when we're talking about him going outside to smoke, did you see him do that yourself?
well, I didn't go outside with him, but I knew why he was leaving Mass to go outside to smoke.
And isn't it true that the only time you saw him do that was one time?
No.
All right, let's go to the deposition then. 203, 5 through 13.
Overruled.
13.
I asked this question, it's the same exact question, so.
All right,
So
Andy there?
what's
Yes.
another basis for the objection, Mr. Chestnut? Let me have Mr. Gary, he really should be doing the objection. There's one. All right.
All right, okay.
Am I supposed to read?
No, I'll read it for you, okay? Are you there? You see it?
Yeah.
Okay.
Wait,
Oh, no.
This-
Can you get it?
Deputy, that's okay, no, it doesn't move because it's true. So hold on, it's okay, we'll help you, that's all right, we'll help you, just wait. We got it, I got it.
But the chair doesn't move.
It's not supposed to move, so,
Oh, I thought there was wheel.
no, it doesn't move.
Sorry. Yes. Okay.
All right.
Now, wait a minute now. What did you say now, Sue?
203,
3.
5 through 13.
Okay.
Okay. You were asked the following questions and you gave the following answers. Question. So would he leave in this middle of Mass to go outside and smoke? Answer. Yes, he would. Yes. Question. Did you see him do that yourself? Answer. One time, I think. Question. One time? Answer. One time. He didn't come to church much on Sunday Masses. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
All right.
Yes, but can I?
I think you'll have the opportunity maybe to talk.
Can she go ahead?
She could, you guys went.
Well, I think my only question was, did I read that
No,
correctly?
Stop. Go ahead.
Yes, you read it correctly. But whenever, let me read this again because I want to make sure I'm saying it right. When we went to church on other occasions too, like communions or baptisms and stuff like that, when we would be in the church, to me it was like a mass. My father would always go outside, and have a cigarette. So that's what I meant.
Okay.
I mean, actual Sunday Mass, he wasn't there as much as, my mother was with us.
Okay, but I think the question was, so would he leave in the middle of Mass to go outside and smoke? The answer was yes, he would. Yes. The question was, did you see him do that yourself? The answer was one time, I think. The question was one time, and the answer was one time. He didn't come to church much on Sunday Masses. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
Okay. Now, Ms. Lupo, you talked about on direct that your father was born in Stamford, Connecticut, correct?
Yes.
That's where he grew up.
Yes.
And Stamford is about 30 minutes outside of New York City, right?
Yes.
And I think you talked about this with Mr. Gary, but your grandmother, your father's mother, actually lived in Brooklyn, in the city, right?
Yes.
And the jury has heard from you and other witnesses that your father was illiterate. But his wife, your mother, could read and write, correct?
Yes.
And your Uncle Guy, as you said, who was very close with your father, could also read and write, correct?
Yes.
You can read and write,
Yes.
and both of your sisters can read and write.
Yes.
Growing up outside of New York City, you had magazines in your house, right?
Yes.
And some of those magazines were Life magazine
Yes.
and Reader's Digest.
Yes.
Now, the jury has already heard about Life magazine, but it was known for its beautiful glossy pictures, right?
Yes.
Your father really liked to look at those pictures in Life magazine, didn't he?
Yes, he did.
Your mother liked to read Reader's Digest, correct?
My mother had Reader's Digest, but my mother really didn't read the whole thing. She liked the section where the people would send in stories about their life, and they were like funny stories. She loved to read those. She didn't read through the whole magazine. She liked certain parts, and then there was a joke section too that she loved to look at. But my mother didn't have the time really to sit and read a whole magazine.
Okay, but you did receive Reader's Digest in your home, right?
Yes.
And you actually...
Actually, my aunt Yvonne used to give them to my mother.
Your Uncle Guy and Aunt Yvonne would give them to your mother after they were married.
I think they got them, yeah.
Okay. And so then your mother would look through them, right?
Yeah.
And you would look through them, right?
Not so much me.
Oh, okay. Because Mr. Gary asked you if you ever saw an ad saying that cigarettes were dangerous in Reader's Digest. But are you saying that you actually never even looked at Reader's Digest?
I didn't read it. I might have looked through it, but I never read it.
Okay. And when you were looking through it, did you ever see any cigarette ads at all in Reader's Digest?
I don't remember now.
In addition to reading magazines, your family watched TV, right?
Yes.
And your family watched TV together quite a bit, right?
On the weekends, yes, yes.
Your father kept up with current events by watching TV and the TV news.
He watched mostly the local news.
And the local news was the New York City news, correct?
I couldn't tell you. I didn't pay much attention.
Okay, but you guys lived very close proximity to New York City, as we talked about,
Yes.
right?
Uh-huh.
And you're sure you got New York City broadcasts, correct?
No, I wasn't sure that I got New York City broadcast.
Okay.
I just, local would be, like, he liked to hear about if there was accidents in the town or robberies, stuff like that. That's what he was interested in mostly.
And you remember your father laying in bed watching the later nightly news as well.
If it came on and he wasn't asleep.
You actually remember two famous news anchors that the jury has become familiar with over the past week, Walter Cronkite and Harry Reasoner, right?
Yes, I do remember those names, but I remember them. You know, when I became familiar with those names was when President Kennedy was assassinated. I remember hearing those names all the time because we were watching that nonstop.
I'm sorry. Your family was around the TV watching this huge news event nonstop?
Well, I mean, we ate and we stopped to go to sleep and stuff, but, you know, we watched it. We were, you know, shocked by it, and we were interested in it.
And that was something that your father was interested in, the news, right?
Well, in that particular news, yes. Yes.
And in addition to the news, your father also watched a number of other shows, correct?
Yes, he did.
Gunsmoke,
Love Gunsmoke.
Bonanza,
Yes.
All in the Family,
Yes.
and Sanford and Son.
Yes.
Now let's turn now to your father's smoking history. So we'll start at the beginning. You did not see your father smoke his first cigarette, correct?
No, I don't think I was born then.
And as far as any direct conversation that you ever had with your father never told you when he had his first cigarette, correct?
No, he didn't tell me.
And other than what other people may have told you, besides your father, you don't know anything about the first time your father tried a cigarette, correct?
No, he told my sister. He didn't tell me directly.
You don't know who he was with when he tried his first cigarette?
No.
What brand it was?
The only thing I know is that he smoked unfiltered brands.
But that's not...
My sister told me, yeah.
Right, so what I'm asking is for any conversations you had directly with your father, okay?
No, I didn't have that directly.
Okay. So you never had a discussion with your father about how he obtained his first cigarette, correct?
No, I didn't.
Or if he tried to hide it from his parents or anyone else.
No, I didn't talk to him about that.
And you don't know why he started smoking, correct?
No, I wouldn't know.
And you don't know when your father became a regular smoker.
I really couldn't tell you. like I said, my sister said he said when he was a teenager.
Okay. Your Honor, objection.
Sister,
You just right.
remember, we can't talk about what other people say.
Oh, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Now I want to talk about the brands of cigarettes you personally observed your father smoking. I think you told the jury that your father smoked Cools and Parliaments, correct?
Yes,
And you said that Cools was manufactured by R.J. Reynolds, right?
I think so, yes.
But that you weren't sure who manufactured Parliament.
No.
And so if I told you that Philip Morris manufactures Parliament, you don't have any reason to disagree with that, correct?
No.
Okay. But as long as you can remember, your father would always smoke Parliament for a certain amount of time, say a couple of weeks, and then switch back to smoking Cools for a certain amount of time, correct?
Yes.
You never asked him why he was switching between Parliaments and Cools.
No.
And your father never told you why he chose to smoke Parliaments and Cools.
Never told me that.
Cools are a menthol cigarette, right?
Yes.
Parliament is not a menthol cigarette.
Right.
Your father never told you why he smoked menthol cigarettes, correct?
I never asked him.
And similarly, your father never said why he smoked filtered cigarettes, correct?
No.
Now, you told the jury that your father had tried to quit smoking but was unsuccessful. So I want to ask you a few questions about that, okay? Now, you remember your mother complaining about your father smoking ever since you were growing up in Connecticut, right?
Yes.
Your mother used to get pretty upset about your father smoking and complain to him about his smoking quite a bit, right?
Yes, she did it.
You recall your father making an effort to quit smoking between 1958 and 1974 when you lived on Weed Avenue in response to your mother complaining about his smoking.
Yes.
On that occasion, when your father tried to stop smoking, he gave it up for an hour and a half and then went right back to smoking, correct?
Yes.
And you saw him go for an hour and a half without smoking only on that one occasion, correct?
That I physically was in the house and saw him do that, yes.
Okay, and that's what we want to talk to you about. We want to talk to you about what you personally observed about your father and his quit attempts, okay?
Yes.
Because other people get their opportunity to testify about what they observed.
Sustain, just one word, objection.
That one time on Weed Avenue, sometime between 1958 and 1970, is the only time you personally observed your father make an effort to quit, correct?
Correct, but I said that, but what I meant was that you said, you personally saw, I remember, your father smoke, and I was a little kid then. I didn't sit and stare at my dad, you know. I wanted to be accurate. I didn't sit and stare at him. I would go out to play. That one day I saw him do it. But then, and also, when I got older, I was more a teenager, so I was out of pot. I didn't actually sit and stare at my dad do it, but my mom would always complain about the smoke and the yellow of the walls. So he would always say, I'll try.
Objection, Your Honor. Hearsay.
Sustain.
Oh,
You're just
sorry.
right.
That's okay. Okay.
Let's stay on mind now.
Okay. All right, overruled.
So,
Okay, that's okay. Why don't you re-ask the question?
All right. So, ma'am, what I'm focused on is what you personally observed about your father's quitting, okay?
Yes.
That's what we're really trying to understand here.
Okay.
And so as far as your personal observations of your father making an attempt to quit, the only time you ever saw him make an attempt to quit was that one time between 1958 and 1970 for an hour and a half, correct?
Yes, but like I said,
Okay, thank you.
No, stop. Go ahead. You can finish now.
but like I said, she would, I'd hear her as I was going outside. I'd hear her say, you know, Bud, because she called him Bud. That's his nickname. Bud, this smoke, it's yellow and everything, blah, blah, blah. And I always heard it, but I didn't stay to sit and watch him. He would say, I'm going to try, I'm going to try to quit. And I didn't sit there and stare at him. That's what I meant.
Okay.
You know, so I wanted to be accurate. You know?
Sure. And I think you are accurate because what you're saying is that There were some occasions where you would hear your father say, I'll try.
All through my life.
Right.
Yes.
But as far as,
Yes.
okay, but as far as what you personally observed, ma'am,
Yes.
you actually never personally observed any other attempt to quit besides that one time between 1958 and 1970 for an hour and a half, correct?
Correct.
All right. During that one time on Weed Avenue that your father went without smoking for an hour and a half, to your knowledge, he did not throw out his cigarettes, correct?
No, I don't remember that.
He did not throw out his ashtrays.
No.
He did not throw out his matches.
No.
Now, you said that you heard your father saying, I'll try, right? But your father never told you that he had tried to quit, correct?
He never told me. No.
Is that right?
Didn't tell me, but
Okay.
I knew he was trying to quit.
Okay, but the question was, your father never told you he had tried to quit, right?
No.
Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Okay. He never told you he was motivated to quit smoking, did he?
Well, I didn't have that conversation with him.
And you never heard your father say he couldn't quit, correct?
No, he said he tried, so, but he couldn't, so.
Okay. But what my question is did you ever hear your father tell anyone that he could not quit?
Well, I can't recall.
You told the jury that your father wanted to quit smoking, but isn't it true, Ms. Lupo, that your father never told you that he wanted to quit smoking?
Well, he didn't say to me, I want to quit smoking, but I knew by what he did when my mom complained that he said he was going to try. He tried to quit.
Okay, and so what my question is did your father ever tell you that he wanted to quit smoking?
No.
And you never heard him tell your mother that he wanted to quit smoking, correct?
I don't recall.
And you never heard him tell anyone else that he wanted to quit smoking.
I really don't recall. I don't recall.
So, Ms. Dupuy, you don't know if your father ever said to anyone that he wanted to quit.
That's the wrong name.
I'm sorry. Ms. Lupo.
Yes.
I'm sorry. I apologize. Your sister.
Okay.
So, Ms. Lupo, you don't know if your father ever said to anyone that he wanted to quit smoking, correct?
Well, he said it to my sisters and stuff, but not like to me.
Do you know if he ever said to anyone that he wanted to quit smoking?
To my sisters.
All right, let's go to your deposition, ma'am.
Okay.
We'll turn to page 283, lines 23.
The first one,
I think this one's in the second volume, ma'am.
what is it?
283, 23, through 284, 2.
Oh, say that again. 283 what?
23. Lots of numbers, sorry there.
28. 283, 23.
Yes.
Okay.
Are you there?
Yes.
Okay. You were asked the following question in your deposition and you gave the following answer. Question. So do you know if he ever said to anyone that he wanted to quit smoking? Answer, I don't know. I don't know. Did I read that correctly?
Yes.
And to the extent he told your mother, I'll try, when she was complaining, you believe that he was saying that to try to appease her, correct?
No. I think he was trying because he wanted to quit smoking.
And if he wanted to quit smoking, that wasn't something he ever told you.
No, he didn't say it right to me, no.
Well, I think as we looked at your deposition, you didn't say that to anyone as far as you're aware, correct?
Sustain. Oh, no comments, no editorials, just objection, please.
You don't know if your father ever used the nicotine patch to quit, right?
A patch?
Yes.
No, I wasn't aware of that. No.
He didn't try hypnosis.
Not that I know of hypnosis, no.
He never went to a stop smoking clinic.
No.
He never asked for help from a doctor to quit smoking.
he tried nicotine gum, and he tried, acupuncture.
You personally never saw your father use nicotine gum, correct?
I was in Connecticut.
Right, right. So you had no personal observations of your father using nicotine gum, right?
No, I don't.
That was just something that Donna told you.
Yes.
You don't know if he even wanted to quit smoking using the nicotine gum, correct?
Yes, I know he wanted to quit smoking, definitely.
When he was using the nicotine gum, you don't know if he wanted to quit smoking, correct?
No, I know he wanted to quit smoking. He always wanted to quit smoking for my mother.
Right, for your mother. That would be why he would want to quit if he did want to quit, right?
Sure.
About her.
Yeah, you may step down and step out as well. And deputy and officers come over with the search warrant too. Mr. Gary, Mr. Chestnut, any additional argument at this time?
Yes, this is the same practice we objected to this morning, Your Honor. The case law is very clear that it has to be directly contrary to materially different.
The last statement, is that what we're talking about, the last question?
I don't think I even gave a page and line number for the impeachment.
Correct. So the case law further states, Your Honor, that if counsel is going to impeach the witness, that they first must lay a predicate. But before they can lay a predicate, they have to impeach the witness on the prior statement under oath that is directed as materially different or directly contradicted by their statement today. However, and the court has made ruling repeatedly that for counsel to impeach the witnesses, they must read the exact question from the deposition. That's not what counsel is doing. Counsel is.
Which question are you objecting to? Why don't you pull it up please, so I can take a look.
So, Your Honor, we can go back to the prior objection where you sustained our objection.
Why are we
Sidebar. That's one. Well, for instance, page 283.
But I sustained, so
Yeah.
what did I do incorrectly?
No, Your Honor, what I'm demonstrating is a pattern.
Okay.
Because you sustained it, because they did it there. In this instance, Your Honor, counsel is saying in your deposition, and then they're going to impeach. So there are two things that are incorrect here.
I said,
You can't say in your deposition, you cannot say that is calling. So then, because what counsel does then is when she says anything about what somebody said, and she objects on her own cross-examination to hearsay. Well then, if we're gonna say hearsay, her inviting the deposition testimony is hearsay. The exception to the hearsay is a prior inconsistent statement. She hasn't made the predicate of a prior inconsistent statement. 1, 2. The question she is reading is not the question from the deposition.
I'm lost. Which question are we talking about? That's what
what they objected to was me asking, you don't know if he even wanted to quit smoking using the nicotine gum, correct? And she said, yes, I know he wanted to quit smoking, definitely. And I said, question, when he was using the nicotine gum, you don't know if he wanted to quit smoking, correct? Answer, no, I know he wanted to quit smoking. I always wanted to quit smoking for my father. I think that's messed up. But basically, I was going to go to 302, 6 through 8, that says, do you know if he actually wanted to quit using the nicotine gum? And she said, I don't know. So I think that's directly contradictory or materially different.
303,
302, 6 through 8. I mean, the fact that they objected before they even heard the page and line number.
Because this is consistent.
But what's the objection so I can make a ruling?
Okay. The first objection, Your Honor, is there are two objections. The first objection is to counsel leading into their question with the predicate in your deposition.
I didn't.
Where is that?
There are a number. Your Honor, we can go back through the testimony, but the testimony here is complete with that. She leads in with in your deposition or in your testimony.
If you can pull up an example, I'd like to. I mean, we can look at it.
All right, I'm going to do a search. In the rest form. Why don't you guys work it out? I'll be back in about 5 minutes.
And so, Your Honor, I'm basing this argument on Florida Statute 90.614, prior statements of witnesses. And 90.614.1 says when a witness is examined concerning the witness's prior written statement or concerning an oral statement that has been reduced to writing, the court on a motion of adverse party shall order the statement to be shown to the witness or its contents disclosed to him or her. 90.614.2. Extrinsic evidence of a prior inconsistent statement by a witness is inadmissible unless the witness is first afforded an opportunity to explain or deny the prior statement and the opposing party is afforded an opportunity to interrogate the witness on it. But the interest of justice otherwise required. If a witness denies making or does not distinctly admit making the prior inconsistent statement, extrinsic evidence of such statement is inadmissible.
Admissible.
This
admissible.
is admissible, excuse me.
Right.
So extrinsic evidence of such statement is admissible. The subsection is not applicable to admissions of party opponent as defined in 9.803. Your Honor, so counsel, Mr. Schneider, on page 11 of our transcript from today says, no ma'am, in your deposition you were asked. Page 11, line 16. At any time in your deposition did you say that? Page 11, line 19. At no time in your deposition when you were page 13, line 2 through 4. Okay, now you said in your deposition. Page 15, line 13. Testified in your deposition. Page 16, line 5 through 6. You didn't say this in your deposition. Page 44, line 24. In your deposition, you gave the following answer. Your Honor, procedurally, this is incorrect. It is an incorrect form of examination or cross-examination of a witness. The rule clearly speaks to and therefore infers, and so it's a necessary inference of the rule, Your Honor, that extrinsic evidence, meaning the deposition, cannot be presented to a witness cannot be cross-examined on extrinsic evidence without them showing. Therefore, Your Honor, Mrs. Schneider, if she's going to reference the deposition, needs to show it to the witness. But if she shows it to the witness, then she automatically triggers what? The predicate. So now she either has to show that, she can also show it for two purposes. Either to refresh the witness's recollection or to impeach the witness. Well, the witness has to make a directly controverted or materially different statement to be impeached. She has not done it. Mrs. Schneider will have to lay a predicate to refresh the witness's recollection.
Why doesn't she just do it that way then? So that's easy. We'll just have her show the deposition to the witness, and we'll do it that way, and it'll be just refresh recollection.
I would disagree, Your Honor,
Okay.
because
Correct. So, and the witness
yes, and she actually said a directly contrary answer, which was, yes, I do know this, when her answer in the deposition was, I don't know. Your Honor, it can be clear. It's directly contrary. I asked this exact same question.
Okay, just ask the questions without watching the word deposition. This is
Yeah,
about nothing, okay?
I know.
So just don't use the word deposition,
Right.
okay? So Mr. President, your objection is sustained. Let's move forward. Next, please.
about the page 302.
Yes, uh-huh.
Page 302. So here's what's happening, Your Honor. They're materially misleading the witness. So page 302,
Okay.
let me just read this question. So she was asked, here's a line of questions starting with 4613.
Okay, hold on.
46.
I'm sorry, which page are you on?
Referring to today's.
This is
Oh, I'm sorry, I thought you were in deposition.
So the question is, so you have question 2, the witness. So you have no personal observation of your father using nicotine gum. No, I don't. That's consistent. There was something that was something that Donald told you. Answer, yes. Question, you don't know if he even wanted to quit smoking using the nicotine gum, correct? This is a question they were going to impeach on. The answer, yes, I know he wanted to quit smoking, definitely. Question, when he was using the nicotine gum, you don't know if he wanted to quit smoking, correct? Answer, no, I knew he wanted to quit smoking. I always knew he wanted to quit smoking for, I believe it's my mother, but it says father. Right, for your mother, right. Would be yes, you would be yes, would want to quit if he did not want to quit, right? Sure.
I think that's messed up.
So here's the impeachment. Page 302, as
Okay.
announced by counsel,
Yes,
line 3 through 8.
6.
Do you know how long, do you know how long a period he tried to use nicotine gum? No. Do you know if he actually wanted to quit using the nicotine gum? I don't know. Your Honor, she says, I don't know, but she never is qualified here in saying, I don't.
She said, yes, I know he wanted to.
Correct. That
It's
is
directly contrary.
Yes, he wanted to, and I don't know is not the same answer.
Yeah. Mr.
No,
Tressler.
Your Honor.
Yes, he wanted to, and I don't know is not the same answer.
Okay. She said, you have no personal observation of your father using nicotine gum. No, I don't. That was something she heard from her sister. She says, yes. You don't know if he wanted to quit smoking using the nicotine gum, correct? Yes, I know he wanted to quit smoking indefinitely. That is not a directly controverted answer, Your Honor.
I've been allowing you guys to do that. So it's the same thing. Yes, he wanted to, and I don't know, is not consistent. Mr. Gary agrees. All right, so your objection's overruled, right, Mr. Gary? Okay, all right, so.
It just doesn't mention nicotine smoking. So what I'm saying is there's
Nicotine smoking, what?
different words.
But it's the same exact
To get an
question.
impeachment.
I'll ask the same exact question, Your Honor.
That's fine. We're all on the same page, guys. We're gonna ask the same exact question. We all know how to do this, and that's how we'll get the impeachment. Anything else before we bring Jerson? We good? Okay, all right, let's bring Jerson.
Jury's entering.
Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much. Make yourselves. Here we go. We got it. Okay. Okay. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen. Make yourselves comfortable, and we're going to continue. We just need to witness. We need a witness.
Although I probably, be fine with nicotine.
Okay. I think she's outside. Welcome back, are you ready? All right, thank you, Ms. Lupo. Just watch your step again. Here. All right, we can continue, Ms. Schneider.
All right, welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Ms. Lupo, where we left off was talking about nicotine gum. And I think the question we left off at was, do you know if your father actually wanted to quit using nicotine gum?
Yes. I know because what I have to say is between the years I was in Connecticut, the only communication I had was through Donna. I couldn't be there because my son was sick and he had seizures and autism, and I had to keep him in schools. The only time I could communicate was through Donna to tell me about my father, what he was doing, what he wasn't doing.
Okay, all right, ma'am. Well, if you just go to the deposition.
But I couldn't be there, you know.
Okay, well, let's go back to my question, which is about whether you believed he wanted to quit using nicotine gum. If you have the deposition up there,
Yes.
the second volume, ma'am, page 302, lines 6 through 8. Let me know when you get there.
302. Lines 6 through 8.
Are you there?
Yes.
All right. Now, ma'am, in your deposition, you were asked the following question and gave the following answer. Question: do you know if he actually wanted to quit using the nicotine gum? Answer: I don't know. Did I read that correctly?
Yes, you did.
Let's talk about the acupuncture that you mentioned. The only knowledge you have about your father going to acupuncture is through Donna as well, correct?
Yes.
You don't know where he went for acupuncture
No.
or how many times he went for acupuncture.
No, I don't.
You don't know if he actually went any amount of time without smoking with acupuncture, correct?
No, I don't know.
And other than the nicotine gum and acupuncture, your father never used any other quitting aid to try to quit, correct?
Not that I know of.
Your father never tried to cut down by even a couple of cigarettes in an effort to quit, did he?
He couldn't stop smoking.
Okay, but my question is, to your knowledge, your father never tried to reduce the amount of cigarettes he smoked by even a couple, right?
As far as I saw, but before, I don't know.
And I'm just asking about your knowledge.
Okay.
And your knowledge is he did not cut down even by a couple, right?
He kept smoking, he couldn't stop. That's
Okay, but the answer to my question would be right.
right, okay.
And you're not aware of any time your father made an effort to quit at all by trying to cut down on the amount of cigarettes he smoked, correct?
Yes, well, that time when I told you I watched him, he stopped smoking, cut down, and then he stopped for those couple hours.
Okay, right. The time that you talked about between 1958 and 1970, where he stopped for an hour or an hour and a half.
Yes.
Other than that, your father never made an effort to quit by cutting down on the amount of cigarettes he smoked, correct?
Correct.
One of the issues in this case is what your father knew about the dangers of smoking. Now, you never had a conversation with your father about what he knew about the dangers of smoking, correct?
Correct.
And sitting here today, you can't testify about what your father knew or didn't know at any point in his life about the dangers of smoking, correct?
No, that's not correct, because my father didn't know smoking was bad for him, or there was chemicals in it that would kill him, because if he knew that, I think there might be a possibility, I can't say for sure, that he could have quit. I don't know.
There's no information that would have caused your father to quit smoking any sooner than he did, right?
I don't know that.
Sitting here today, you can't testify about what your father knew or didn't know at any point in his life about the dangers of smoking, correct?
I don't think my father knew that smoking's dangerous.
Okay, let's go to page 337 in your deposition, lines 337, 14 through 18. Let me know when you get there.
Say those lines again?
Sure, it's 14 through 18.
14 through 18, okay.
Okay, you there?
Yes.
All right. Your deposition in July of this year, and I was asking you the questions. I asked the following questions, and you gave the following answer. Question. So sitting here today, you really can't testify about what he knew or didn't know at any point in his life about the dangers of smoking, correct? Your answer, I don't know, I guess not. Did I read that correctly?
I'm Mrs. Dan.
Thank you.
No, you're fine.
Or did I read that correctly?
Yes, I read it.
Okay, that's fine. What you're re-asking.
All right. So sitting here today, you really can't testify about what he knew or didn't know at any point in his life about the dangers of smoking, correct?
I don't think my father knew that
Well,
smoking,
she's not impeaching. You can answer. Go ahead.
that my father knew smoking was dangerous to him. I'm a pretty nervous person, and when I did this deposition, I was scared, I'll tell you the truth. I was scared of you because, in the beginning, you were a little hard on me, so I really was nervous, and some of the answers I might have given might have been a little, I tried my best.
Okay. Well, I'm really sorry you felt that way, ma'am, because certainly I never meant to be hard on you or disrespect you in any way. But, ma'am, you did have the opportunity to change some answers to the deposition, didn't you?
No, this is valid. Overruled. So you can answer.
You've had the opportunity to change answers to your deposition through what's called an errata sheet,
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
All right. And you actually did serve an errata sheet,
Yes.
and you served an errata sheet for your first deposition,
Yes.
and you made 14 changes, right?
Yes.
Okay. You never served an errata sheet for your second deposition.
Yes, I did.
Sure, Mr. Chestnut.
I'm just talking about a conversation that you had with your father, okay? So let's confine your answer to anything you actually discussed with your father. And in any discussion with your father between you and him, your father never mentioned to you any statements by R.J. Reynolds, correct?
Second guess.
Overrule.
Between me and my father?
Yes.
No.
Okay. And same question about between you and your father in a discussion. Your father never mentioned to you any statements he heard from Philip Morris.
Not to me. No.
Your father never told you personally that he ever relied on anything the tobacco company said about smoking.
Not to me personally, no.
And your father never told you that he would have quit if the tobacco companies had given him more information about smoking.
This is the state of mind of the process. I mean, yeah, that's all.
But that's an exception, they would say, right? So, okay,
So that's an exception that we have access to.
oh, I'm not, so whatever the objection is, I'm overruling. Let's proceed.
Okay. Now, your father never told you that he would have quit if the tobacco companies had given him more information about smoking.
No.
The jury has heard about some tobacco industry organizations. As of your deposition in this case,
I'm gonna keep referring to.
Sustain. Sustain.
as of July of this year, you had never heard of the Tobacco Industry Research Committee, also known as the TIRC.
No, I never heard of that.
So it follows that you never talked to your father about the TIRC, right?
No, I never did.
And as of July this year, you had never heard of the Council for Tobacco Research, or CTR, right?
Right.
And you never talked to your father about CTR, correct? You never saw anything on TV about either organization, TIRC or CTR, right?
Right.
As of July of this year, you never heard of the Tobacco Institute, or TI, right?
Right.
And you never talked to your father about TI.
Right.
So, to sum up the point, your father never said to you that he got any information from TIRC, CTR, or TI, right?
Not to me, but.
And that-
Oh, all right. No,
and that's the
not to
question.
me. Okay.
Okay. As of your deposition, as of July of this year, you had never heard of a frank statement to cigarette smokers.
No.
And your father never mentioned the frank statement.
No.
And isn't it true, ma'am, that your father never told you why he smoked any cigarette in his lifetime?
Did he ever tell me why?
Right.
No.
You understand your sister, Donna, is claiming in this case that your father died of coronary artery disease, right?
I don't know.
Yeah, I object to that.
Sustain.
Thank you.
You don't know what the claim in this case concerns?
As far as I know, my father had lung cancer.
Okay. And
That's what I know.
as far as you know, your father died of lung cancer.
Yes.
You understand that there is a history of congestive heart failure in your family, right?
No.
Well, isn't it true that your grandfather, Guy Cavalier, died of congestive heart failure?
Yes.
And you've never heard anything about any doctor suspecting that your father had congestive heart failure, right?
No, I think I remember when, you were at the position, you read something that might have said something like that. I didn't pay attention to that because my concern was lung cancer, you know.
So prior
I
to,
didn't even know that.
okay, so then just to be clear, prior to May of this year, you had never heard that your father was suspected of having congestive heart failure, right?
No, I didn't know that.
So it's right that you had never heard that,
Right.
correct? And as of July of this year, the only medical conditions that you're aware of your father ever having were diabetes and lung cancer.
Yes.
Last topic. The jury has heard that your father was diagnosed in 1989 with lung cancer and COPD, that he connected to smoking, and that he died in 1993. In those 4 years, your father never told you he blamed tobacco companies for his cancer, right?
Right.
Even after he was diagnosed with lung cancer and COPD, your father never said to you that he wished the tobacco companies had given him more information about smoking, correct?
I wish they had, but no, he didn't.
He never said that.
No.
In the 4 years between his lung cancer diagnosis and his death, your father never said he regretted smoking, correct?
I wasn't there, so until, you know, when he was dying.
So he never said to you in those 4 years that he regretted smoking, correct?
No, I wasn't there.
So the answer to my question
Yes,
is,
it's correct.
okay. You need a tissue? I think it's right there. Okay.
Do you need a break?
That's all the questions I have. Thank you.
Do you need a break before we direct?
It's okay, you okay?
Okay, she's okay, Mr. Gary.
Sure, of course.